Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and one actor as we have a hour-long chat on how to make the world of work just a little bit better. Jeremy, today we're actually going to be looking at developing and implementing competency frameworks for performance management. I have absolutely no idea what that means, so maybe a brief explanation to start with.
So in doing all the prep and all the research for this, I had to stop myself about 5 minutes ago and say, what are we really trying to accomplish today? Because it's started to get almost into, for this month, for the theme that we have this month, it's highly technical stuff. And I thought, what's best for the audience? Because it started to me to feel more like a technical training. So I'm glad I stopped myself. So what we're going to do, we're going to get into it, of course, like we always do. We're going to provide a lot of resources, and I have a really good resource that is it's full of templates. It's by a best-selling author, and there's also a lot of research, because I mean, we could really get into all the technical stuff. We might brush on them, like management by objective, behavioral observation scales, and all this different stuff. So the idea today is to look at the performance review process, and we'll go over some very specific competencies. And it's nice because the resource that I'm going to provide, the main resource that we're going to touch upon today, has a model with also templates in terms of, is your company a growth company? Is it a mature company? Is it more of a startup? Is it more hourly workers? Is it more like professional oriented, like you've got a bunch of lawyers or consultants? So what are the different competencies involved there? And then we'll take a broader view in terms of what is actually needed in order to get everyone on the same page. Well, we will also get in today, which is very important. You've got like this, a lot of the times there's disagreement amongst managers, and you have this thing, I forget the exact name for it, but it's where if you look at it on a graph, you have more people with the fours and the fives, and then very few people with the ones and the twos, if you're using like your traditional scale. And when in effect, it should look more like a bell curve. So we're going to get into that as well. And we're also going to get into that most annoying thing for everyone involved in the performance review process. What differently can we do besides does not meet expectations, meets expectations, because those are sometimes performance killers. So with this resource that I'll share when I'll put everything in the chat. There is a new way to do it in terms of the wording that I really like. So Tom, I'm going to turn it back over to you because that's what I do.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. And now that I get an understanding, I want to pull it even further back, because news from the front line, performance reviews, they're not done well. I've gone through several. I went through one a few months ago, and it was, let's sit in the room, let's both be very uncomfortable. And basically the conversation goes, I think you're doing great. How do you think you're doing? I think I'm doing good. Well, you need anything? No, I think I'm doing good. Okay, well, thank you very much. And that is the performance review. A scale of 1 to 5. What are you talking about? I'm not sure that's a great way to go anyway. But you actually want the performance review to mean something and to make the organization better. And once again, we live in a world where there's a thing called IO psychology, and there's all these great, smart people who could really help you. But organizations, a lot of them, especially the smaller ones, aren't getting the message. And, especially looking at performance reviews, boy, an IO could be helpful. So, Jeremy, how do we even start with performance reviews and just getting them out of that scenario of, well, we'll stare at each other and then we'll say that things are good and we'll move on?
It's amazing how so many companies are, even when you look at onboarding, we talked about this a long time ago, how onboarding for some organizations, it used to be sign these papers, sit in this room, watch this video for 5 minutes. And it's interesting because I'm guessing there are plenty of companies that still do that. It's just one of those things. It's like, if you don't understand it, you're afraid of it. Like, why are we afraid of snakes? We don't understand. How do you move without legs? What I did was I put in the chat one of the references, because quite frankly, there's a lot of references, and I just tried to put it in there and it said, your post is too long. So I'm going to have to piecemeal them in there. But that's the main reference. You can buy the book. I think the book is it's like $13. You can also, you can find the PDF free online. I don't exactly know where, but what the reference is, it's Falcone, Paul Falcone, and a gentleman with the last name of Tan. It's called the Performance Appraisal Toolkit, redesigning your performance review template to drive individual and organizational change. And for those of you in the space, Paul Falcone, he's written the 2,600 things to say during a performance review. He's a best-selling author, at times probably 10. This book it's over 200 pages long. It has everything in it, absolutely everything in it. And I've been working off of this for a number of years now with added research. So let me get back to answering your question, but I wanted to give some background on what we're using. So typically, it is a big thing. And Tom, what you said is right. Hire an IO. Hey, get in touch with CBOC and we'll help you out. That kind of shameless plug, because that's what it really ends up being sometimes. Sometimes you would like that hand holding and someone to help things make sense, because we're not just talking about, okay, here's this static. We've decided we're doing them once a year, twice a year. By the way, quarterly is best, but it's just not feasible. We're doing it once a year, twice a year, and we've got this template, and our managers know that the employees are going to get a self-eval form, and then the manager is going to fill it out. But then, of course, the manager is going to have these questions. Well, what if these guys over here, what if they're giving out 5s and I'm not giving out 5s, but I'm trying to be accurate and I give out 3s? Does that make me look bad? But then the company said, we can't, nobody can give out 5s because we don't want to pay them for ratings of 5. We don't want to give them that salary increase. And we always have to say there's room for improvement. Or then you have, it's only due to exceptional circumstances that someone can get a 5. So there's all these questions. So then it's like, oh gosh, what do we do? And then you have your standards. So what is it? What is it usually? You've got your 1 through 5 scale. And it goes from fails to meet expectations, partially meet expectations, meets, exceeds expectations, and then your 5, which is superior. So there's a different rating scale in this book that I like because of the wording, and they get into exactly why it's worded this way. But you've got on your bottom line, unsuccessful or unacceptable performance. Partially successful performance, that would be basically your 2. 3 is your fully successful or effective performance. We can see how just wording these is different, but they also come with definitions. Superior or highly effective performance, and then distinguished performance. The other thing that's important is, and again, this is, Tom, I got to stop myself for just a half a second. I get this is highly technical stuff, but it's so important. So if you're listening or if you're here, the idea is take some notes, expand your thought, and see where you want to start so that you can be helpful to your company. Because as much as I'm trying to stay away from the technical stuff, it is important, because the things that I'm mentioning now are the biggest headaches. There's something called a rising string problem, where basically you've got, and actually looking at this graph here, you've got, for example, 41% of the company gets 5s. And then you've got 29% of the companies gets 4s. And then you've got down. So it looks basically like your average, left to right going up. When you look at what should be happening within organizations, consider a standard bell curve where less than 5% are at that unsuccessful performance. Less than 5% are at that distinguished performance at the very top. And you've got your 50% of your organization gets your fully successful performance, which is in general your meets expectations. And you've got, I won't get, again, I don't want to get too technical, but think of it as a bell curve. The other thing that's important here is really getting everyone on the same page. And that's when you have to have what these authors call roll-up meetings, because you've got to get all the execs and all the managers in the same room and to talk about what's going on here, to talk about, hey, we have these definitions. So what does this actually mean? Meaning they can have this conversation around, all right, so if we're giving fives, what does that mean to us? Okay, in the definitions here, it's like role model status, performed above and beyond, generally recognized as the top among their peer ranking group. So then they're having this, the people that are using these rating scales are having these particular conversations, and you might even bring in examples within the company of what that looks like. And then you've got the reference is so good, this Falcone reference, because it provides these definitions for each one and these descriptors for it. So you're asking, Tom, you're saying, like, where do we start? Because it's usually uncomfortable. And the idea is, what needs to be done differently to make it uncomfortable for everyone? And one is make it comfortable. Well, let me take out the word comfortable for a second. Make it accurate and effective for the employee. Because I used to say that employees look forward to their performance reviews like it's exciting to them. It's like the Super Bowl. It's their time. But for managers, they don't like it. Some of them hate it because it's a lot of extra work. They might be having conversations with employees that they really haven't been having a great relationship or even that great communication with. But how do you get everyone on the same page? A, make it accurate. B, make sure all the managers are on the same page so that they feel confident. C, make sure you're doing your performance reviews at ideally a quarterly basis. Some companies will say, look, we're doing them on a annual or a biannual or an annual or a twice a year basis, but employees have the option of a more informal quarterly, because and that's good, because that can also show you who are the up and comers. Also, the last thing I'll say is you've got to add training too. You've got to train the managers, train whoever's doing the performance reviews, train them on the process, train them on what does a 5 look like, what does a 4 look like, give them some maybe some training or some role play on how to actually have the conversation. Then provide a mini training for the employees on what it's going to look like. Take some of the uncertainty out of it so that it's not just, okay, I'm going to go in here, I don't know what to expect. If I don't hear what I think is accurate, what do I do? Because then you start to incorporate that element of trust by doing so as well. Tom?
Yeah, and as we've talked before, if you're an organization, are you spending your training dollars wisely? Once again, maybe an opportunity to invite an IO into your organization to look and see how you've been doing with training so far. Brendan, let's go to you.
So I love this conversation because I'm actually in the process right now of doing a new performance review for a client. So a lot of the steps that Jeremy's talking about is exactly what I'm doing. Is that on Tuesday, I'm actually doing a training with the managers to go over it. And then there's a handout that is associated with that goes over the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It also talks about rater errors. And then I was also just looking at the book because LindaAnn saved it, but definitely something that is worth it if you're in performance reviews, compensation, or an IO or HR, because there's a lot of concepts in here that are extremely important. So if you can see the link in there, I definitely click on it because it's pretty awesome. But I did want to talk about what I see a lot of is organizations are using performance reviews because they just need to check a box and get it done with so that the employees stop complaining about it. And in reality, if you were to take the performance review and have your competencies based off of not only your organizational culture, but your business goals, and then using the STAR method to talk about situation, task, and so forth, about how that actually drove the business forward, you would actually have a much more impactful review beyond just yeah, they were good. And one of the other things that I did in this performance review is I used a bar scale or a behavioral anchor rating scale, so that when you're looking at a 3 and the manager's looking at it and they're going, oh, I think this person's a 3. And it's okay, great. Here's an example of what a 3 is in this competency. So I have a 5-point scale for every single competency that tells you a quality of work, or one of them is commitment to the organization's goals. I have an example of what a 1 is, what a 2 is, what a 3 is, what a 4 is, and what a 5 is. And then the manager has to see which one most closely aligns with that before making the rating. So you can do a lot of this work, but you have to have somebody who has the skills to be able to do these things for you, which is what you're going to have a lot of on this call. But I think that when you're having this conversation, it should not just be a check the box. You want to make sure that you are pushing the organization forward in the right direction, that you are meeting your business goals. And then the performance review is a cultural artifact of your organization. So if it's done wrong and sloppy, it reflects on the organization as such.
Well, let me ask you this, Brendan, because you're actually working on the front lines right now. So was this an organization that sort of came to you and went, we need your help? Or was this an organization that you were working with and you went, performance review, and they bought in?
So it's an organization that needed help, because I think I'm now the 3rd or 4th consultant that's come in there in the last 4 years. So other people, there's a lot that needs to get unraveled there, but they were never able to get to the step of, let's sit down, let's come up with competencies, let's come up with what you want to accomplish out of this performance review. And I was able to get through all that other stack of things that needed to get handled to get us to this point. And we're at about 10 months in since I started.
Wow.
So it's taken a little bit of work just to get to this stage of it. But luckily now I was able to set all the steps forward, get the executive buy-in. Now I'm getting the manager buy-in, and then the employees will just, hey, now I know what I have to do. Now I know what I was doing wrong. And I always caution this because, and I'll just bring it up because it's very important. If you have if there's something on a performance review, and ideally at least twice a year, yearly is not going to cut it. But if we go on that twice a year method, if you're bringing up some sort of specific situation about something that somebody did wrong 5 months ago, you already failed as a manager. If they did it wrong 5 months ago, the time to address it was 5 months ago. So I think these are very important concepts that as IOs, we need to drive home to managers, because I still see them doing it. And they're like, well, this person did this. I worked with one company where the guy wanted to write certain things on a performance review. And I was like, well, when did that happen? 2 years ago. I was like, okay, great. Then you should have put it on the review 2 years ago. You do not put it on the review now.
And that's what you get if you hire someone like an IO psychologist who actually knows what they're doing. And you can turn your organization around. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
I too am working with somebody through performance reviews, and I think it's one thing I want to say first is I think the 5-point scale can be a real challenge just because of the structure of it. Too often you get people, when they're not sure, they just give that 3, right? And there's not as much granularity as there really needs to be in communicating it. It's just too easy. If I'm not sure, I'm just going to give them this because it's in the middle of the road. And so sometimes just even expanding it to a 6-point scale can be a little bit more helpful, because they have to make a decision. Is it above the line or below the line? So that's one comment. I think you can go to, if you're going to a higher level of granularity, I would say just do it in an even number so that you don't get that midpoint that's just too easy for them to default to. So that's one comment. And I absolutely This needs to be done on a quarterly basis, and the employee themselves are responsible for part of that process. It is not just the manager or leader's responsibility to make sure that that happens. It's your performance review. It's your success. It's your ability to move forward. So take responsibility on the January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, October 1st, whatever that is. I always had, when we did quarterly meetings, I would remind them all to go look at their performance reviews and to see what goals where they were on their goals, so that they could go ahead and schedule that meeting with their manager, because it's a mutual responsibility, and it doesn't have to be a full-blown performance review. It's just an update on where your progress, right? To make sure that you're progressing. The other thing too is making sure that this is a key piece in organizational alignment, and making sure that that they have solid job descriptions to work for, because you can reference performance to the job description in your performance standards. So those are just a couple of points. I know that there's a lot of hands up, so I'll let everybody else have a minute.
Yeah, and I should say, I'm one of those employees who, I love going to my superiors and going, how am I doing? First of all, I want some feedback. I want to improve. I also like to get patted on the back every once in a while, but I often find that, I will walk into someone's office and, how am I doing? And they get this look on their face like, oh my God, what has happened? What's gone wrong? What fire has now ignited that you're asking me this question? So it's really uncomfortable on both sides. Maria, let's go to you.
Can I just say something before we move to in response to that, Tom? Sometimes it's just you get a better response on if you say, what would you like to see me do differently?
I will try that. We'll see if it improves things. All right, Maria, let's go to you.
Hi, it's great to be back. Haven't seen you all for a while. Brendan and LindaAnn both brought up some of the points that I was going to make, so I won't repeat those. But I think Jeremy also hit on the point. A manager needs to know their employee, and management is a busy job. We don't dispute that for any reason, but a scale isn't the only piece of an evaluation that's important. If there's no narrative or room for narrative in that particular evaluation and goal setting to go with it, then it's all for naught. And I've seen organizations that have had robust evaluations, and then they bring them down just to the scale, and the narrative is gone. But I think it's also important to remember that you can't evaluate somebody that you don't have some type of relationship with, right? And if we don't make the effort in leadership to scale whatever knowledge we need to gather, then to someone's point here, having the employee be empowered to share their activities with leadership so that those can be noted, and not be afraid, to be looked upon as trying to step on someone's toes, trying to build themselves up so that they can take somebody else's job. But it is an organizational, departmental, divisional partnership. And I think, we always talk about the biannual or annual review, but the fact of the matter is it's a day-to-day activity. And it's a culmination of all of those activities together. And to Brendan's point, nothing should ever be a surprise on an evaluation, ever. If you haven't talked to the employee about it within the year, you should not be bringing it up on the evaluation. You can make general statements to how you think a person may achieve goals, but you should never bring those things up in an annual evaluation, because it could actually backfire. And if you have an employee that's smart enough to grieve, or to not want to sign an evaluation because you have no proof of what you're talking about, then it could be problematic for the institution. So to Tom's point, get an IO, have someone who's, vested in helping you help themselves. But it's really important that we remember that an annual review is a review of someone who knows the work that you're doing, so that you can make sure that you not only evaluate them properly, but help them grow to the next level properly. Or we also have to remember that annual review can be used if that employee either goes downhill or doesn't meet those goals. And you have documentation throughout the year so that if you have to take corrective action, you do so without any problems. A good manager documents so well that there's never room for a grievance.
Yeah, very well said. Lee, let's go to you next. Then Jeremy, we're going to go off to you.
Thanks. I mean, I want to start off, Tom, by saying you're doing a great job. So I just wanted to put that out there. So Tom, I'm actually going to get ahead of a question you normally ask me. So in answer to your unspoken question, the Navy's evaluation system sucks. So it's kind of an interesting thing because on the one hand, the evaluation form has parameters, which is great because it tells you, it says, okay, here are the things in this category that you should be aiming for. And it gives you the, barely making it, gives you this kind of a scale to grade on. So that's positive. But then the majority of it is based on a write-up, which is most of the time done by the person themselves and then cleaned up by the manager. And then to make it all even better, they take everybody in the same specialty, or not even the same specialty, the same rank, and they compare them across the organization. So like I was an information system technician. I was being compared to a logistics specialist because, we're all the same, right? So, and then ranking people. So, and people out there listening, don't rank your people. Just don't. But so, don't do like that. But as far as in the civilian world, the important things are the expectations. Like LindaAnn said about the job, what is your duties? What is the job description? What are you supposed to be doing? And then goals. So what am I actually rating you against? It shouldn't just be my opinion. Oh yeah, Jeremy's doing a great job. Boom. So, but at what? So I need to be able to have a measure, and you can go beyond a 1 to 5, 1 to 6, whatever, but what am I comparing it against? I should be comparing against previous performance. Was there an improvement? What are you supposed to be doing? So are you doing that? And are you going beyond that? Because, that should be taken into account as well. And then what are your goals? How are you doing against your goals? Now, of course, like in my current organization, we set personal and professional goals. So when I sit down with my boss, he's not going to rate me on my personal goals. He's going to do what he can to facilitate me getting those goals accomplished. What he's going to rate me on is how I'm doing towards organizational goals. And so, it's important to do that, because if you have an employee that you said, hey, I want to go back to school. Well, did you go back to school this year? No. Okay, mark that down. Well, that's not really very motivating. Let's not do that. And I totally agree with everybody who said this should be done at least quarterly. You should be sitting kind of talking to people. The Navy's thing is you have a midterm counseling, which is basically coaching, and then you have a yearly evaluation. Some people are doing it, some people are not. I don't think that's often enough. I always did at least a quarterly coaching session, and I think that that's what you should do with your people. As we've said, nothing should be a surprise on an evaluation, because if it is, it's not their failure, it's yours. So you definitely don't want to do that. But like, my team lead, he was looking to discipline someone for a failure, and I asked him if he had communicated what the expectation was, and he had not thought of that. So I'm like, well, how can you tell him he's not meeting expectations if he doesn't know what those expectations are? So first, let's go back and let's communicate expectations, and then we start fresh slate. And then if he doesn't meet them in the future, we will document the fact that he did not meet them, because I can't hold him accountable for something I didn't tell him, or at least I shouldn't, although I've seen it many times.
I like the way you look at this, Lee, but it puts two things in my head. First of all, you got to actually care. Like, you've got to care about your employees. You got to care about their development, where they're going. I find most organizations use performance reviews as a way to beat employees slightly, to encourage them to do better work, because if they don't, they might lose their job. That's the way that I see most often performance reviews being used. Yeah, and I'm
it's the old cliche that beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely, it's the whole thing with catching more flies with honey than vinegar, and using the carrot instead of the stick. I mean, you really, if we go into the psychology part of IO, you look at the difference between, positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. They both can elicit the reaction that you want. One is just going to be a little more, long term and more likely to get a little bit more buy-in from the person in question. So, you definitely can. And the problem is we don't train. And we're going to go back to this. We talked about this so many times. We don't train our managers. We don't train them to lead. We don't train them. They know how to manage the things. They don't know how to manage the people. They don't know how to lead. And we don't train them how to actually communicate with their people, to manage those expectations, and to properly evaluate how someone is doing against it, and to communicate that to the person. And so a lot of times the organization is failing the managers before the managers are failing the people.
Well, I think,
step off myself.
I think Work Cookie should be the #1 podcast in the C-suite. I think that's really where the next message needs to get. Jeremy, let's go back to you.
Lee mentioned exactly what are we measuring, and that's where I'm going to get into the meat of some of the actual competencies. This is why I like this Falcone book so much, because it'll go through. It's not just static for every company. It's, are you a startup company, like I mentioned before, a growth company, mature, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to give a couple examples of how, if you're a company, how do you choose the model? And they provide templates in the book, but it's not to say that you have to use those exact competencies. They will vary based on exactly where your company is, what type of company, what your company objectives are, and of course, core values. That should be standard in all of these. So it'll vary a little bit. But for example, you've got this startup or renewal company where it's either a startup or it's a mature company looking to more or less reinvent themselves. When you look at this, the performance expectations, if you use these types of competencies and the scale that's suggested for this, it's a higher level of performance expectations, because the company is redefining and raising the bar so that they can have more opportunities and a higher level of productivity that's needed in that particular type of company, whether they're starting up or renewing. And just to give an example of some of the exact competencies suggested for this, you've got creativity and innovation, culture and values, problem-solving skills with results orientation, strategy and critical thinking, to name a few. And there's, a couple more. When you look at the template for a growth company, this is your company that's, you're no longer in the startup phase. You're doing pretty good in terms of profitability. You want to continue to look for opportunities, but you're looking into creating guidelines and what are the policies and getting communication flowing in the right direction. So that's what this particular template and these are used for. So some of the example competencies here are customer-centric, teamwork and leadership, professional and technical knowledge, and creativity and innovation, to name some of the top ones. And there's a couple more. Again, the idea is take a look at your company and what phase that you're in, because what are the particular competencies? And in this book, they provide, so like I say, creativity and innovation. Well, they provide definitions, examples, everything for that. So it's not just what is it? They provide everything there in terms of what they found with the research and in executing these things. I want to move to a mature company. So this is you've got stable sales. Instead of being on the more offense like a startup or a growth company, you're starting to do more defensive posturing, and you're looking more at policy orientation, cost control, documenting, those kinds of things. So the performance competencies here are corporate image, teamwork, professional development, and communication. You can see those top four are all different than the other types of companies. Then you have a model for hourly or a union workforce emphasis. This is where you're looking at basic expectations, rounding out key performance areas, largely hourly workforce when you're looking at compliance, policy, timekeeping, professional conduct, dress code, those kinds of things. So the top competencies here to measure on for during performance appraisals, you've got customer focus, teamwork, quality, efficiency, flexibility, and others. But we can see how they're starting to change, and for good reason. The other model, and there's actually 6, so this one and then another one. So then you have your exempt and your professional workforce. This is when I was talking about, is your company mainly in like research or legal or finance, where it's more of a professional workforce all around? These kinds of jobs require different emotional intelligence, soft skills. You're looking at more real life example models when you're doing the performance appraisals. So here you can see the top totally different judgment, decision making, job knowledge, and then you've got innovation and flexibility, initiative, teamwork, and there are a couple others. The last one is senior executive focus. So this is where you're looking at your C-suite. This is where you have that the scales are thrown out as an example of what can be done. And it's more narrative because you're looking at crafting an evaluation form for these VPs and higher up. And you notice that this is more on strategy. So you move it back to the ones that we talked about previously. You're looking at just tactical, like for the hourly workers, where here you have to have a combination of tactical and strategic level considerations. So here some of the top competency areas are strategy and vision, financial management, results-oriented leadership, and operating skills. Again, markedly different than any of the previous 5. So in going back to one of your original questions, Tom, where do we start? First, you start by saying, where's our company at this very moment, knowing that you can, in due time, you're going to have to redo your evaluation a little bit, but it's not that hard to move. So some people might say, look, well, I just want to choose one and I want to stick with it for the next 10 years. You can do that. It's probably not going to be a good idea, because you want to have like, what are the competencies that you want to measure to take your company to that next phase, or make sure it's solid in the phase that it's in. And it's really not that hard if you're going to change from your startup competencies. You just change your competencies on the form and you send out, basically you just send out a different form. So I also want to mention, Tom, this goes back to, there's a lot here. And what do these competencies mean? And what are the ones that are perfect for our company? And how do you look at different psychological indicators on the back end? Tom, yes, that goes to what you keep saying, hire an IO, because there's also a lot of research that needs to be done on, like Brendan was talking about, like your MBO, like your management by objectives. And there's a lot of research to be done. I threw some other references up in the chat, and all these references, by the way, will be in the show notes. So if you're hitting the podcast, just check on the description of it and you can see all the references. Most of them this week have clickable links, but you have studies that show what's better in which situation. So you have your behavioral observation scales, your behavioral anchored rating scales, you have your graphic rating scales, and you have your management by objectives. So there's a lot going on here, but you can find the research. And I'm looking at some of the research I did in the notes that I took, where in terms of goal observation, the Rady's perception of the goal, and in Rady satisfaction, GRS was superior to bars, or BOS was superior to bars in terms of a Rady perception of the goals in terms of the exact specific criteria. So there's a lot of weeds in here, but it's important that the time is taken and the care is taken to make sure that, look, these are the competencies we want to evaluate. These are the scales that we are going to use, and that we're also providing insight, vision, reducing uncertainty, and providing the training, if you want to call it, for those who are not only doing the ratings, but also receiving. And let's face it, if you're giving a rating, you're also receiving one from your higher up. So it doesn't go on wasted time. Tom?
Let's certainly hope not. Lots of hands up. Aaron, let's go to you.
All right. Yeah. Talking about the competencies, I mean, we mentioned earlier, hey, this might get a little high level. There's a lot of multifaceted pieces, a lot of things that we're juggling, and we might fall into the weeds, like Jeremy said. So I'd like to take the time actually to circle back just slightly and recap a little bit. When I came into this, I thought, okay, as a manager, I know that this is going to get there's going to be a lot of plates in the air, going to be juggling a lot. So what is the lowest hanging fruit to look at, to focus on as me as a middle manager or a senior manager or somebody who's just not quite at the competencies level of looking at things in the vision? And one of the first things I look at is language. That's what we had talked about a little bit in the sense of how are you talking about these performance reviews? Tom, you mentioned your experience with this of, hey, you doing well? Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. How about you? Pretty good. Okay, that's it. Well, to me, that's not a performance review, right? And it makes me think of this quote. I think my boss had mentioned it to me and I took it to heart and I just formalized it. But it's the concept of if you have a list of goals and the word continue or keep doing is on that list of goals, that's not a goal, that's a habit. And you don't need to check in with habits. You just need to check in when you drop that habit. It's kind of like the gym. Okay, I just have to go to the gym. But if you have the goal of, doing a handstand, then powerlifting or juggling how much weight you have instead of your body weight is going to go towards a different direction. And that circles us back to the competencies. The second thing we had mentioned is frequency, of course, is having this conversation more often. And then lastly, providing those tools, that gap, and it all comes back down to creating an environment where this performance review is a performance conversation. So one thought with that is, as LindaAnn had mentioned, the rater and the person being reviewed both have an obligation to contribute to this. So with performance review, you could have a self-report. If I have a 5 for myself and somebody else has a 3, that alone prompts a conversation as to, oh, what's going on? And that could reveal and define some hidden expectations behind these scenes as well. And additionally, LindaAnn mentioning open-ended questions, having, hey, what can I do to be better and reach these goals, as opposed to you didn't reach this because of this, this, and this. It creates that conversation once again. And having that frequency of those conversations reduces those surprises as well. So I think ultimately, if you are a manager looking at, hey, what's the lowest hanging fruit? Language. How are we talking about this? And then frequency. How often is it coming up in many different forms?
Yeah, communication, number one. If you don't got it, you ain't getting here. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
Yeah, Aaron is exactly right. When I have people do their self-review and then the leader, the manager is doing their piece of the performance review, there's parts of the performance reviews that are identical. And I look for the rating and I teach them that the purpose of that comparison is to identify where there's a gap in the understanding for that particular standard. So if you've got yourself as a 5 and your manager has you as a 3, that's a cause for conversation, right? And you need to get on the same page on that particular item. So that's really the real purpose of doing those pieces. And to what Maria said earlier, the narrative is also just as critical. Asking for that feedback on, are you doing the kinds of things that you like, or what training have you not received that you need in order to perform well? Those kinds of narratives are extremely important, and I have them set up as half rating, half narrative. And when you structure your performance review well, it helps the manager because it creates that script and takes away some of that discomfort so that you understand what you're going to be talking about. The manager has already seen your feedback and they should be utilizing that in the process of completing their piece and their form. So it's a progressive type of process. And often in an organization, I will sit in or ask them if they're okay with me actually sitting in the performance reviews so that I can model for them how to conduct that conversation, how to, in addition to some training, but you can give anybody that hour of training or whatever, and it doesn't always translate to how they conduct themselves in a situation. So I usually would sit down and be involved in the actual performance reviews so that I could coach both sides through the process. And then once they're comfortable with it, their behaviors have changed. The other thing too is it's really important for this to be a progressive, forward-looking process. So one of the things that I've set up in organizations is that you understand, and sometimes this is done in the industry, they'll set up what the different levels are for you so that you know a level 1 person in this particular industry and what's the level 2 expectation, level 3, and so forth. And you can use them to help people understand what's it going to take for me to get to that next level, and use that as that forward-looking progression.
I think you just hit on CBOC needs to do a workshop on how to actually conduct a performance review. Jeremy, right? Yeah, go ahead, LindaAnn.
The other thing that I would just wanted to make before we close out, this went so fast, is the challenge for the organizational size, right? When I was doing the research as well, and this can be done to do this well. This is a really comprehensive process. However, you have 2 challenges within most organizations. One, they don't have the internal expertise, nor do the managers have the interest in doing this on a very detailed level. And my experience has been that I get a lot of pushback. Once it gets past a certain 2 pages or whatever, they're like, this is too much. And so we have to figure out what that middle ground is how accurate can we make it? How effective can we make it that's palatable for our people to use?
Yeah, and I think you just hit on something that's really important for all organizations is you have an HR professional. You might now need to bring an IO professional in to work with them because they make a dynamic team and they can set you on the right path. Noel, thanks for hanging on so long. Let's go to you.
Yes, I've been listening quite closely to the concept of having transparent processes around performance management procedures. As very key as well because there's a trend of managers also then perhaps using performance reviews as a weapon against employees that don't like per se if the process is not done procedurally and data driven from the beginning of the year. I tend to consider the process starting at the beginning of the year, when you allow employees to consent to what goals they have to reach, the organizational goals, and also create means to create a peer review mechanism as well throughout the process, especially towards the mid-year reviews or the end of year reviews, where even peers can give feedback on how you work well as a team, because also trying to avoid the creation of a super chicken culture, percentage of employees who work at the expense of others, So there's those different percentages we should consider, in work culture environments where, because of performance review, someone wants to, especially where you have to work as a team, and you're handing over work to another department. How do you collaborate with them? How do you work together closely with them? That should be, a measure as well in performance reviews, as opposed to, a linear relationship between you and the company alone. So, and also creating this culture of also reflecting on unconscious biases that maybe occur throughout the year, through managers as well, who may then use that to then, performance reviews, it's now time to get rid of a dead weight. I should just score this person a 3, because I don't like this person. If it's not done, I tend to use the term democratizing the process, whereby peers review each other. Then you review your manager as well, and the manager reviews you. So it's a cyclical process, continuous throughout the year, where you reflect on goals you set and agreed on at the beginning of the year, to prevent a culture of a linear, almost one-way relationship between you and the company, and that you just reflecting on marks you receive for random criteria. So yeah, it also creates a culture of fairness and objectivity, I guess, if you make it more data-driven and democratize the process, and the safeguards against biases and discrimination, certainly in the long run, because it creates a culture of reflecting on teamwork, collaboration, and also a sense of ownership of the process, and the idea that performance reviews are not just a process that happens in the middle of the end of the year, but a continuous process, a documenting of a process that happens throughout the year. And then there's no surprise marks or indicators that just pop up at the end of at the performance review, and then as a means to as a weapon against you as an employee, or as a way of getting rid of certain people in the company. Then they use performance reviews. So it's a trend I'm seeing, like especially in tech, where there's an urge to lay off people. Companies may then use it to mask layoffs, and decide to then use that to weaponize and say, okay, we want to get rid of this department because they're performing well. Yes, let's go to the performance reviews. We actually don't need this team. And yeah, a very a very important marker then, a clique culture in companies that may occur, whereby a clique comes together and says, okay, we're actually going to get rid of another clique. Let us come together, and so because of the conscious and unconscious biases that occurred within work cultures. So it's a very, I think, reflecting on democratizing the process more going forward, as opposed to then saying, okay, yes, training is important. As a strategy designer, I like the concept of having to educate, IOs, HRs, and managers to work together to create clear frameworks from the beginning, but also to make the rest of the company aware of their goals from the beginning of the process, so that the performance review is not a tick box or a weapon or a feature used to get rid of certain people in the company.
Yeah, I know that there are organizations out there who use performance reviews to get rid of dead weight, and they're like, there's got to be a certain percentage of people. We've got to have a certain percentage of turnover, so they will actually, the bottom 10%, they're gone. And that's probably not the reason you're doing a performance review. Rich, let's go to you.
Just real quick about just trying to think this through on a documentation side of things, because I think you're right. I think that helps to put everybody on I can't say a level plane, because there's still some degree of power above you, but I think when you allow the employee to have that input into the both, because they're incumbent employees, the industrial part of the task-based job analysis part of what they're being measured against, and let them have that KSAO, the competency modeling that is the O side of things, right? When you allow them to have some input into that whole process, I think you really start to, kind of level that playing field. And so there's SIOP and SHRM, I put it in the notes there, but, they have a white paper series that they did. And one of the things is, doing competency models. There's a documenting the public version, which again, having some of that, it's more than just the job description, but it's something that is viewed by all, and everybody has has some degree of. Let me put it this way: it's more of a fluid document, right? That can be changed and altered, and has a change history and all that stuff. And then there's also this deeper second type of document that's a lot more technical and that type of thing that should be stored by management, but still transparent. I mean, you still have to have access to it. I guess what I'm really saying is, like, having that documentation and having everybody prior to, whether it's a annual, biannual, or quarterly, or ongoing, which I aspire to do that, or as the ongoing performance review. But for everybody to know, what's expected of them from that task-based part, but also, what are those soft skills and those other competencies, and really having those things documented and agreed upon. Like if I'm engaged in a consulting agreement or a contractor agreement or whatever, there are certain things that are expected of me, that I need to live up to. So we have that kind of psychological contract within the organization too of, this is what is expected of me, and this is how I'm expected to behave, and these are the the characteristics that I expect of you and you expect of me. So that's
Yeah, and once again, better communication. This shouldn't be sacred knowledge. It's not like we're trying to trick anybody. Share the information, and that will help. Just and as you say, Rich, if we're talking about my job, I'd like to be involved in that discussion. Why leave me in the dark about that? Jeremy, I want to go back to you because this conversation has reminded me of our days with VCM and talking to people like Liam Martin from Time Doctor, Glenn Gaudette from Gagalamp, people who really seem to get it right, where they've got great relationships with their employees. It doesn't mean that they're not doing evaluations. And sometimes either someone is asked to leave the organization or they go, you're not in the right position. And they actually move them to a position which makes them, better and happier. They're more skilled to. But should we be looking, they're both remote only companies. I think they've got a physical location because they have to, but they're online companies. Should we be looking at online companies, especially those that are doing it right and having success, as sort of a model of what the rest of us should be doing?
Oh, I would say
you could say it. It depends.
It does. I mean, it totally depends on if they're doing things right or not, because we know how one thing doesn't transition to the other. I mean, I would say just like my answer would be, if you're partially or fully remote, then yeah, maybe see what other the successful partially or fully remote companies are doing, and then the other way around for that. So I'm going to say it depends on that one. I'll also say, yeah, it's like, it's pretty good. Good. Thanks, Tom, for that question.
You're very welcome.
I try not to go it depends, or it's situational, but I guess you have to at some point.
Well, one thing I was going to say, one thing I've really noticed with these successful online organizations that are doing it right is their communication with their employees is spectacular. Like, they've really got communication down.
Then I wonder how do we know which companies are doing it right? Because of course you've got different things out. You got like Glassdoor, people can respond and give ratings and that kind of stuff. So I think that would be a topic for a whole nother question, because there are probably a lot of companies say they're doing it right, but are they? So good topic. Two things, and then I'm going to share. Aaron really nailed this thing in the chat here. But two things quick. We have our August experience, 3-day experience coming up for IOs. Anyone interested in IO? If you're an IO student, if you're an IO, if you're interested in what IO can do for your company, free 3-day experience. We're gonna also meet on Saturday the 12th. We're gonna do a meetup at a really fun place in the Maryland, DC area. So check out cboc.com/events for that. Chock full of stuff. Next, if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager and you're looking for IO talent and you want in early, go to the contact page and just contact us at CBOC. Go to the website. We are 100% ready for launch, but we're not ready to do the launch yet of a really interesting and engaging way for companies to hire and find IO talent. It's unlike anything that we know of, and we're super excited to offer it. So we just need to make sure, as with everything, because we're IOs, we want to make sure we get it right with the launch and everything to go out first. But we're completely ready. So if you're recruiting for IO talent, get in touch with us. We'll let you in on it right away. Next, Aaron, I just kept thinking. He mentioned he was bouncing off of what Lee said about managers being task-based, leaders being task-based, but should be people-focused, right? So do you have your eye on the task or eye on the people? And Aaron said, a manager shifting to a leader needs competent, developed people, so they delegate the tasks so that they, the manager turned leader, can focus more on people development. What a cycle. And it is a cycle. And I was thinking about this. If you're constantly focused on the task, are you really developing your people? And I thought, what if you have a kid trying to tie their shoe? If you continue to tie it for them, they're not going to learn how to tie their shoe. But if you focus on the kid, it's the child might get frustrated. I can't make this loop. Hey, remember that bunny we saw outside? Maybe remember the shape of the ears? How about you make a bunny ear? Hey, remember that time you tied your brother up to a tree and hit him with a squirt gun? Think about that knot you used, whatever it is. And you get that kid competent, you get the child excited, and you get them to learn to tie the shoe. Then that child is competent and developed. So that's kind of the idea. When we continue to focus on tying all of our employees' shoes, instead of developing them so that they can do the tasks, because then your job as a leader is to be able to delegate effectively so that you can continue to focus on people development. Therefore, you need people that are competent and skilled, and you focus on them rather than the micromanaging aspect. So thanks, Aaron. That took me for a ride there, a little bunny loop. Tom, I guess that's it.
Almost. You've mentioned the conference, and that is less than a month, I think, away now. So if you don't have your free ticket, make sure you go out and get there. Spread the word. We want to fill those rooms. But let's talk a little bit about what's happening next Thursday.
Yes, next Thursday. Tom, do you know?
Yes, we're going to be talking about implementing workforce analytics and data-driven decision-making in HR, LindaAnn, in HR.
Great. Another non-technical thing to talk about. But of course, we'll try to make it as engaging as possible. I do believe Destiny will be with Tom leading that particular one next week. So join us next week for that. And of course, every Thursday at 12, they are all open mic. So everyone can feel free to chime in. And by the way, if you do chime in, you can always get the link to the podcast, put it on LinkedIn in your featured in section, give you a little social media type boost where it's like, hey, contributor, here's me showing my stuff. It's great. Tom, anything else?
Yeah, don't forget that Lee has his ongoing pop-ups. Lee, where can we find out about that?
Well, I dropped the link to the LinkedIn event in the chat earlier. I do post that every week on LinkedIn. I post something, whether we're having it or not. I post something, and then usually it is on Thursday, and it will be this evening at 6:30 Eastern, translated to your respective time zones. And we'll be going for 2 or 3 hours and just getting to know each other better.
And if you're not listening live, if you're listening to the podcast, you can find Lee Crowson on LinkedIn and find out that information. Dr. Martha's not with us today, but you can find her with her own podcast, and you can find her on YouTube as well. IO psychologists are changing the world, one podcast at a time. I like the saying, it used to be, if you want to be perceived as an expert, write a book. I think it's becoming, if you want to be perceived as an expert, start a podcast, because I'm lucky enough to meet with all these wonderful experts every single week, including you, Dr. Jeremy. And that is it for me.
Very good. Guess we'll count out. Beautiful as always. See everyone next week. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.